Hey, John, what are you doing here?
Well, I don't know. And how come I was so big and you were, well, here we are now. We have parity. So this is good.
That is because I am among giants, John.
Well,
So,
as am I.
hey, everybody, welcome. I just love that intro. I want to say thank you to Brooks Knudsen and Andrew Landini from Landini Media for creating that. Welcome to Intersections. Until I memorize this, you'll see me looking down for some notes. So Intersections is a weekly conversational jam hosted by John Kale and myself. We dive deep into intersections among technology, innovation, culture, and ideas. We bring diverse personalities and probably a lot of friends and world views together in service of a greater understanding and unlearning. So I'd like to say welcome. I'd also like to introduce you to my co-host, John. John, I'm going to memorize this, I promise, but it's so vast. So, John, The Economist has called you Mr. Creativity and a serial innovator. John is a thought leader, entrepreneur, and advisor who has played a prominent role in the fields of innovation and business creativity for over 30 years. He taught at Harvard Business School for 14 years, my goodness, and also served as visiting faculty at MIT Media Lab and Stanford. He's also a Tony-nominated producer of film and stage and wrote the best-selling Jamming, The Art and Discipline of Business Creativity. John also wrote the music for our intro and outro, and so I am just privileged to be alongside you, John. Thank you.
The honor's all mine, Brian. And let me reciprocate by introducing Brian Solis, my erstwhile co-host and co-founder of this venture. I mean, I want to note that this is the debut and the world premiere, and it's as if we're at the dawn of a new medium now, which we've been piecing together over the last month or so. I think we feel like movie guys in 1910, kind of figuring out the grammar of this new media. And who better to collaborate with on this than Brian, who has a background equally eclectic, who is currently the global innovation evangelist at Salesforce, but has an illustrious background of thought leadership in digital transformation and what he calls digital anthropology that dates back really to the dawn of the digital transformation movement, if I can call it that. Celebrated author, best-selling author, many books, many fruitful interactions with audiences. And between his network and mine, we are so excited to bring you these diverse perspectives and cause them to intersect.
I love that. Hence the logo, which is, I just love it. I love the intro. I love the outro, as you'll see here at the end. Also, I just throw in one more thing that John and I officially met live at a restaurant in San Francisco last November during
the Indian
Dreamforce.
Restaurant. Yeah, we had known of each other for a long time, but hadn't met face to face until last fall.
And I do keep of many of John's things. I actually have all of his little pocketbooks on this desk and actually my other desk for daily inspiration. So, John, why don't you welcome our first guest?
So I'm very pleased to introduce Peter Leyden, whom I've actually known for quite some time. I would say since the late 1990s. And Pete, I guess, would describe himself as a futurist, but he's much more than that. He's a catalyst. He's an entrepreneur. And he's been, if you trace his pathway, it intersects with a lot of the really interesting conversations, thought leaders, and groupings in the San Francisco Bay Area, which has been kind of a source of intellectual subversion for, going back probably a long time, but certainly in the internet era. He was a key player at the Global Business Network. He has relationships with the Long Now Foundation. He was a founding a journalist at Wired Magazine. And Pete's got something really big to share with us. We'll try to have him say as much as he can about it. But he has a point of view about what's going on these days that he calls the transformation. Welcome, Pete. It's great to have you here. Guest number one, show number one.
Great to be here. It's fun to be on this thing. And here we go. Let's go.
So what are you seeing out there? How's life for you? And then what's this transformation that you're talking about, or the transformation? Let's make sure we have the capital letters enunciated in how we describe this.
Well, let me give a little context to this. As you mentioned, I was a part of the early Wired magazine, and one of the things I did back in those days is I wrote a famous cover story that went into a book and later into a bunch of languages, and called "The Long Boom." And what it was essentially a projection out to 2020 from the mid 90s, and it was a story of the world from 1980 through, which was the past at the time, through the 90s and into 2020. And it was largely a positive scenario, trying to say how a lot of these new startups, like these goofball places like Amazon and others, were going to basically eventually be commanding heights of the global economy. Half the world would be all connected up, and we'd actually have all these things. At the time, it was kind of tons of pushback. Everyone thought it was outrageous, way too optimistic about what would happen. And so we got a lot of pushback. But in fact, here we are in 2020, and largely it played out. I mean, in many respects, the story that myself and my co-author, Peter Schwartz, who was one of the co-founders of GBN and a longtime scenario planner, we laid out was actually there. And so I returned a year ago. I said, well, what if I did the same thing looking out to 2050, the next 30 years, and see to what extent can we really think about a positive scenario of what could actually happen in the next 30 years. And a year ago, this is pre-pandemic, there was a ton of dystopian imagery about what the future really is going to hold. Everyone was in these horrible moods of like the problems with we'll never solve climate change, the income inequality is out of control, political polarization we'll never get past it. And so it was an ambitious project then, but then with the pandemic, it was in fact even more pushing here that people have a very hard time seeing all the positive potential out there and all the possibility that the next 30 years will in fact could be a bigger technology boom, a bigger kind of economic boom, and ultimately a more societal transformation in the next 30 years. People just can't wrap their heads around that. And in fact, that's what I've been working on. I've worked with 25 different thought leaders around the world to get their perspectives on these positive potential of the next 30 years. And so the transformation for me is a series of stories laid out and also talk, and it's building towards a book of essentially all the positive potential we've got out there. And in fact, I think we're heading into the best years are yet to come here. And that's kind of the idea behind that.
So share with us a couple of tasty bits. I mean, what can we wrap our minds around coming down from that great, kind of 10,000 foot view of the project to actually things that will affect us directly?
Well, if you really kind of think through what I would call the inexorables, they're not necessarily, these are technologies that essentially are inexorably developing and will roll out over the next 30 years. If you actually think about some of these global trends and domestic trends for that matter in America here that are basically unstoppable at some level. If you look at there's at least a dozen of these kind of what I call inexorables rolling out here. Now, this is the same technique as, by the way, in the mid-90s, where people couldn't understand that, hey, yeah, there was only 25 million websites in the mid-90s, but, gosh, someday they're going to be 2 billion. Or they understood that, China's GDP at the time was, $1 trillion, but ultimately it would roll out to 12 trillion and be a superpower in 20, 30 years. And so it's this kind of sense of tracking the inexorable. And if you think about that, we've got 3 major waves of technology ahead of us driving a tech change, but also a kind of economic boom around those things. I mean, not only is it the next stage of information technologies, artificial intelligence, and all the things that AI will actually bring to us as we wire up, by the way, not just half the planet, but the full planet will get wired up in that time frame. But also, if you look at the bioengineering, biotechnologies now are at the point of genetic engineering and essentially synthetic biology. We're just beginning what is going to roll out in the next 30 years here, just some incredible kind of shifts. Now, we see this anecdotally and stuff, but we haven't really thought through the full implications. And then, of course, it's inevitable. We're going to go through an energy transition that the world has never really seen at the scale and the pace that we're actually working on into clean energy technologies. And if you take a triple whammy economic boom like that, or technology booms like that, and play through those implications, you start to really think about it. Now, it's not just tech, too. There's all kinds of demographic shifts in motion and other kind of things that when you really parse them out and really start to stitch them together, the synergies between them and how they compound over time, you can make a pretty good case that we are moving into what essentially is going to be a bigger technology changes and economic boom that we've lived through the last, let's say, 25 years, it's actually going to be at even a greater scale in the next 30. And with that, though, because it's so fundamentally different, we're going to have, this is why it's called the transformation, not the long boom too, is that I think really we're going to watch societal and kind of political, governmental kind of shifts on a scale that are really transformative and that are really going to be very distinguished from our 20th century kind of institutions and organizations that we still are hanging on today.
Well, I feel better already. It's a very optimistic view of the future. And I'm glad you mentioned that last point, because I think technology alone won't save us. We're going to have to, in a sense, reinvent the way we do entrepreneurship and the way we do governance and the way organizations function. I mean, a lot of that is being shaken up by the pandemic, right? The great reset, great catalyst, whatever we want to call this period that we're going through.
Well, really, actually, when I started this project, it was pre-pandemic, and even then you could see all the pieces coming together. But I think weirdly, the pandemic it's not really, you can't really call it a good thing, but it's certainly an accelerant to a lot of these changes. It's a catalyst. It is the fundamental kind of break with the past that is essentially pushing us all into hyper drive. I will say this, which is, I know you're a big innovation guy.
Both of us.
Both of you are basically.
Yeah, double threat.
One of the things I think I make the case of this, and it's a series of stories right now of 8 stories, adds up to about, it's moving towards a small book right now. And will be coming out through the fall here. But one of the things that I think is underestimated is the impact on innovation. I think as we go from half a world connected up through these broadband connections that are allowing this kind of new media experience that we're having here, we really are. It's basically inexorable, you could say, that in the next decade, we'll pretty much tie together everybody around the world at high bandwidth kind of connections. So first of all, you're going to bring a lot more people into this kind of environment. We're also, with artificial intelligence, we are getting to the point where we will have simultaneous language translation, which it means between kind of the subtleties between languages are going to start to get to the point where you can trust them in real time, and that they'll actually be able to hear between languages in real time, cross-connecting people across cultures in different regions of the world. And the third thing is that essentially what innovation is essentially cross-connecting in the cross-fertilization of people from different fields, different perspectives, and the kind of new mashup of what that leads to. And I think we're underestimating how much innovation is just going to come out of this kind of technological foundation. And the second big thing about innovation, which I think is people are underestimating, is innovation used to just be a kind of a serendipitous, almost art, you could say, through much of the 20th century. And I think in the last 20, 30 years, we've essentially worked it up into more of a system. We've kind of understand it now as a science almost, design thinking, all the kind of ways of iterative kind of practices, testing, using data, kind of try things that, I know Bride is evangelizing around all over the place. But anyhow, this is now baked into college, university courses, all kinds of things. We have literally millions of people now who understand innovation in a systemic way that we hadn't really had before. And so when you kind of look ahead in the next 10 years, it's hard to predict exactly what will be innovated, but I think it's useful. You can actually make a pretty hard case that there will be an explosion of innovation in many more different fields, and that without knowing exactly what will come out of it, we can actually say it's going to accelerate the pace of innovation. So I think the next 10, and again, if you keep going out 20, 30 years, we are just going to see an extraordinary amount of innovation. And that is not just because of tech, but because of, like you say, innovation in the way we think about how we organize ourselves, how we conduct businesses, how we all kind of rethink government, all kinds of things that are going to happen out of this. Hence the idea, it's really a fundamental transformation, not just the digital transformation that business is hanging on with, but essentially a societal and really economic transformation that I think as we rethink even how capitalism itself works.
Well, you're preaching to the choir here, and I think both Brian and I look at what you just described in terms of the transition from the art and the hand waving to more of a discipline as being part of our life's work. So, we certainly look forward to digging into that more deeply with you. Hey, Brian, is there anything you want to pose for Pete? Because want to hear from you also.
I absolutely have so much to ask and say. It's incredible, Pete. I'm so glad that Leslie's here taking notes, not just for all of our viewers, but for me as well, because you are on fire there. And one of the things I just want to add in the few minutes we have left is, first, thank you. Another thing is that it's such a small world. Peter Schwartz is our resident futurist at Salesforce right now, and he helped scenario plan a post-COVID world in a few different scenarios that are incredible to just to go through that exercise of what's a likely future, what's a crazy future, and then what's the future that you want. And I think it's an exercise that more executives, more human beings actually need to go through. I'm a hopeless optimist, but I want to throw out one thing out here just to get everybody thinking. The art and science of innovation, we are starting to standardize it, as you said. I'm part of a board that is actually looking if they can ISO certify innovation processes. But one of the things that I believe is that creativity and the art of innovation is an undervalued just trait and characteristic. And if we think about just sort of how society even treats creativity, whether it's from schools or in our work, we almost sort of play it down or dissuade it. And I'd love to hear from you what we can do as individuals and also as a society to promote creativity, even everyday small c creativity in our lives, to sort of build innovation or just ideation as a discipline.
Well, I totally agree with you that, I think there has been a kind of cult of innovation has grown in popularity. It's a big thing in media. It's certainly in business circles. What I think has been lacking is this kind of application of the kind of mindset of innovation to other parts of our society. So I think we're watching, again, COVID's blowing up higher education, but higher education has been very kind of resistant to essentially adapting new technologies, including these kind of interactive video connections, but COVID's forcing that. I think our government, we really had a slow kind of adoption in the government world. Healthcare and medical kind of fields have actually had a slower time. So I think one of the things, business and the kind of tech and business have kind of pioneered the kind of obsession with constant innovation. But I think what we can really do to break that down is see all the kind of highlight and show how effective that has been in those other areas, but also to start to make it normalized in these other kind of areas where, the bulk of the people work and the bulk of the people kind of live and the bulk of the people kind of experience society is through those other channels. So higher education in general, healthcare, government, politics, actually now too, governing, and there's all these things. And so I think what we are looking at in the next 10 years, and particularly through the hyper fuel of this pandemic and the need to actually do this through COVID and rebuild our essentially economic foundations, I think we're going to see this adapted all over the place because it's frankly the only way forward, in my opinion. So the more we talk about it, the more we normalize it, the more we make it kind of less scary and more understandable, as you mentioned, routinizing it and making it kind of accessible and almost like building it into kind of ways that people can learn easily and quickly. Those are the things that I think will make it more thoroughly kind of permeate society in a way that we're going to need it, frankly, as we take on not just a pandemic, but right after that, climate change and all the other kind of huge changes that lie ahead.
Right.
This almost feels like we had the overture to a symphony that we're going to want to listen to. And obviously, partnership, I'll consult with Brian, but there's a lot more to say. And as the transformation makes its way out into the world, I think it would be great to have you back and delve more deeply into specific topics, because I know that the transformation work you've done really is quite detailed in terms of the inexorables and has some very specific things to say about where things are going.
Love to do that. And that'll be terrific. I'd love to see you folks again. And thanks for having me on this inaugural show. I hope it's extremely successful. And
Thank
good
you.
luck.
Thank you, Pete. Thank you so much. I mean, my mind is just blown. So we'll reach out, Pete, because we're also going to turn this into an article, and I want to dive deeper in a few things. John and I will ask you some questions. And we'd love to have you back. So thank you so much.
All right.
Now, everyone, we're going to move on to our next guest. Guest number 2. We're trying out this new format to see if we can actually fit 3 guests in one episode. we'll see how it goes.
We are.
And I got to tell you, my mind's already racing. So I know it's only going to get faster here with our conversation with Henry. So before we jump in, I also want to take a moment just to call attention to the wonderful Leslie Evers, who's basically graphic recording all of these incredible conversations so that we can share with you not only through video, but through graphics as well. And we'll give you a formal introduction to her at the end of the program. Also, if you're watching live, please share with us in the comments where you're tuning in from. It looks like we have people from all over the world, and we'll feature you and your questions and your thoughts in real time. So please jump on board. So with that, I'm going to formally introduce my friend and colleague, Henry King. Henry King is an innovation and transformation strategy leader at Salesforce. He's also the author of Flow by Design, a new paradigm for the design of customer experiences and business processes in the connected world. King is a former CIO with over 35 years of consulting and executive experience, both in the US and internationally, with expertise in innovation, design thinking, and information technology. Henry, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Brian. Hey, John. How are you both?
Very well.
And
it's been a long
congratulations on
time.
your new show. It's awesome.
Thanks, Henry. You're now our official second guest ever on the inaugural show. Henry, we have invited you today because you have had, among all of the great ideas and work that you're doing, a new article that introduces a concept around relationship transformation that helps us think about digital transformation in a new light. So before we get started, maybe you could share with us sort of the idea, the impetus of relationship transformation and where it is and why.
Sure, happy to. And I think the real basis of this came from just seeing, digital transformation as being a very hot topic for the last few years. And I've been following it both from the perspective of a technologist, if you like, as well as from an innovation perspective. And it's just been fascinating to me the way that over the last few years, it's been reckoned that somewhere in the region of 80% of all of these digital transformation attempts have failed, which strikes me as being a really, really remarkable and in some ways kind of shocking statistic. And so I've been looking at the various different articles and the various different surveys that have been done about this, and my sense is that, ironically, most of these failures have happened precisely because the focus has been on digital. And there is obviously no doubt in anyone's mind that all companies need to embrace digital technologies if they're going to survive in the 21st century, let alone if they're going to thrive. But just starting from the perspective of digital rather than starting from the perspective of the human, I think has just been, that's been the misplaced emphasis. And so relationship transformation really is just kind of based on this idea that the fundamental point of business is to enable flows of value between people, both individually and in groups. And that's really where we need to start from. What's the human perspective? How do we make sure that value flows between people, again, both individually and collectively? And then how do we most effectively use digital technologies to enable that to continue and to accelerate, in the way that kind of Peter was talking about. I have no doubt that he's right about the acceleration of innovation. But first, we need to get to that point where we've got these connections between people, these relationships between people are really strongly established.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure, John, you have a bunch of things you want to ask. I'm just going to kick off one here, which is, how have you seen, and as you heard with Pete, COVID as an accelerant here? How do you see it as an opportunity for businesses to maybe take a pause, rethink digital transformation and relationships in an era of this pandemic?
So, Brian, was that to John or to me?
Oh, to you, Henry.
Oh, to me.
Or to John, or to Henry.
You're the domain expert.
Well, I think, obviously, we're thinking of this period that we're in as being a kind of in COVID time with a pre-COVID time that kind of stopped around February or March this year, and some kind of post-COVID time in the hopefully near future, when vaccines are readily available and accessible to all. And I think generally speaking, we've seen this time of the in COVID as being a little bit of a pause between that old normal and this new normal. I think what has become clear is that the COVID basically affected all of our standard traditional ways of doing business, and not just doing business, but also going about our lives. It's turned out to be very clear that the way that we go about doing most things in our lives are by, if you like, in aggregation and in centralization. So we aggregate employees in offices, we aggregate students in schools and universities, we aggregate patients in hospitals, we aggregate worshippers in churches, we aggregate fans in stadia, and so on and so forth. And as soon as we were no longer able to do that, our economy fell apart, right? It was just sort of overnight. And so any business, any church, any theater, any school that was unable to connect with people who were now distributed and now dispersed rather than accumulated and concentrated, simply were unable to function. And we saw that, as I say, not just in business, but we saw that across all cultural and social institutions. And so there has been a recognition, and again, bigger than business, that if we are going to, if we're going to be effective at developing relationships and maintain relationships and manage those relationships between humans across all of these areas of our lives, then we need to kind of get on board and adopt and embrace digital technologies in order to do so.
You know, it's interesting. I've been thinking about that same point about disaggregation and what the impact of that is. And I've come to the conclusion that it's forcing all of us to develop a new set of proficiencies that are the true 21st century skills, as opposed to the, kind of the usual suspect items. And that in some respects, we all have to be leaders of our own circumstance and entrepreneurs and innovators in our local environment. And I wonder if you see the same thing. And also, if I can just piggyback onto that, I love the word soul, which I saw in your ZDNet article. And I'm certainly on board with this idea about starting with the human. And I wonder what the one or two initial questions you would have in terms of starting with the human are. In other words, what are the lenses that you use to tease that out? So what do you think about the new proficiencies? What are the lenses that you use to kind of start with the human?
So really good questions. I agree entirely about proficiencies. I think what has been fascinating, at least in the way that I read it, about technological advances, at least over the last quarter of a century, is that nearly all of our technologies, our digital technologies in particular, have been headed in the direction of decentralization, distribution, disaggregation, and so on and so forth. And with that comes increased capabilities to individuals, right? And so as everything becomes disaggregated and dispersed, also people individually become more and more enabled. And so we have seen this obviously with the rise of the World Wide Web and the Internet of Things. We've seen it in the progression from mainframe computers to distributed, to PCs, to mobile technologies. We see it in the emergence at the moment of autonomous cars. We see it in the emergence of telemedicine through COVID. And everywhere we look, we see that the direction or the arrow of technology is pointed pretty firmly, if you like, in all directions. In other words, out. Whereas our organizations have tended to stay rather inward looking, with the arrows pointing inwards at their centers. And so what we found is now individual people, you and me, as individuals, as consumers, as private citizens, and so on and so forth, we're more enabled, we're more autonomous, we're more empowered, as well as being more and more connected to people and to technologies and to knowledge and so on and so forth than we've ever been. And so we are absolutely learning new proficiencies. My mother, for instance, like at the age of 85, has suddenly had to learn 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 different technologies just in the last 6 months in order to be able to maintain connections with her children and her grandchildren, in this time, which otherwise would have been incredibly isolating. But she's been able to do that, and she's obviously not alone. So I think we are learning new proficiencies. We have new superpowers that we didn't have 25 years ago. And organizations, businesses, and so on and so forth have really kind of not kept up with that. They haven't really recognized that their individual consumers, people at large, have superpowers that they never had before.
I want to add just a quick question right there, Henry, because the way that you liken these capabilities to superpowers in its own way actually humanizes the possibility. If you think about it, since the dawn of enterprise technology, we've actually used technology within business and government to sort of scale away from humanity, to sort of introduce efficiencies, automation. But now, sort of since the dawn of social, mobile, real time, we've now been able to sort of consumerize technology. And so when you add that to now these superpowers of, say, artificial intelligence, machine learning, data analytics, predictive analytics, you sort of have this ironic shift with incredible technologies to actually humanize business and humanize engagement and relationship transformation. So how do we shift that mindset and that heart set amongst decision makers, amongst executives, among the people sort of who are in charge, to sort of see this as an opportunity to not only humanize, but to reimagine everything moving forward?
Yeah, obviously it's a really good question. And I think that, as we've already talked about with the idea that COVID has been the great accelerator in this, I think it is incumbent upon all leaders to recognize that we can no longer kind of operate in this model of kind of looking inward and being centralized. And we actually have to recognize that everyone exists and lives essentially on the outside. And so the only way that we're going to be able to communicate with our consumers is by looking out, turning out, in a way that most conventional businesses have never done before. So connecting to the outside, and connecting not just to customers, by the way, but also connecting to other partners, connecting to ecosystems. I think one of the main views about innovation that I see seeing is beginning to emerge is the idea that very meaningful innovation over the next few years and over perhaps the next few decades is not going to happen through isolated companies just going their own way. It's going to happen through business ecosystems that will enable new kinds of very systemic innovation, enabling kind of end-to-end experiences for their consumers, for their customers. So I think that clearly has been an important part of all of this, which is COVID. Again, to Peter's point, we can't exactly call COVID a good thing because of the extremely significant loss of life and livelihood, and all sorts of different losses, incidentally. I mean, there are all sorts of kind of intergenerational losses that we've seen in terms, for instance, for young people, the loss of coming of age rituals, everything from high school graduations and college graduations to sporting events and all kinds of ways in which kind of people have identified transitions in their lives simply have not been able to celebrate that. And so I think it is incumbent upon leaders, and I think I expect that leaders are much more aware of this than they were 9 months ago. They surely are aware that now is the time that if they're going to survive, if they're going to thrive, they need to be connected.
Yeah, excellent. John, I'll throw it over to you so I don't consume the whole conversation.
Well, it seems like you're setting the table for a lot of innovation, because incumbents, as you say, are going to have the hardest time, adjusting to this new rhythm and this new dynamic in the environment. And I want to return to the second question that we didn't quite get to, that I posed a minute or two ago, which is, I love the humanistic, human-centeredness of your approach. What are one or two key conceptual frames or questions or perspectives that you bring to that notion of putting the human at the center?
Yeah, so I think, actually, I don't put the human at the center.
Okay.
The individual at the center. I put the individual on the outside.
But where I think relationships as being important relative to the technology. I guess that's
yes. Yeah, absolutely. I just think that the whole word center nowadays is associated with kind of looking in, and it's associated with aggregation, and I think an important kind of mindset shift has to be towards outside and disaggregation rather than centralization. But so for those lenses, I mean, I think in your conversation really kind of started to think about these things. So user-centered design, so design thinking, I think is absolutely critical. After the first 20 years of my career, I kind of jumped ship from being an IT leader, and I joined a design thinking and innovation group called Dublin, which is now part of Deloitte.
Larry Keeley.
Really a pioneer. Yeah, Larry Keeley, exactly. Really a pioneer in design thinking, formed very much the same time as IDEO, another pioneer in design thinking, fantastic design organization. And I learned a brand new set of skills from Larry and from all of my colleagues at Dublin, and from the design thinking community at large. And I started to see an incredible power that came from listening and watching, and really coming with an empathy first approach to humans as they went about their daily lives. And, so a closely connected lens or a tool set to design thinking, of course, is jobs to be done, which is a framework that came out from the late and very great Clayton Christensen and Bob Mester from Rewired. This is another, again, very human way of thinking about what is it that a product should be doing? What is it that people are trying to get done? And then once you've understood that, then you can start to apply technologies to that.
Yeah.
So
I have a clinical background buried among my miscellany of professional credentials. I actually did a residency in psychiatry at Mass General Hospital in Boston. So I'm endlessly fascinated by this notion of how one develops the clinical skills to be able to accomplish what you say. Because ultimately, and this is back to what Peter Leyden shared with us earlier, if we want innovation to move from being an art to being a science, we have to start thinking about, what the methodologies and the disciplines are that allow us to get there. So over to you, Brian.
Actually, while we wait for Karen to come on, who she should be on any second. In fact, I do see her backstage. I wanted to just ask you, Henry. Well, first, thank you for the opportunity to
thank you.
Work
thank
with
you
on relationship transformation. But can you also give us a preview behind the scenes of some of the things that we're talking about? What might that next stage of relationship transformation look like?
Well,
no pressure, Henry.
Yeah, no pressure. I think So I think this applies not just to customers, right, but also to fellow employees and to ecosystems, as I mentioned. So one of the things, so internally with the organizations, I think we've already kind of hinted at this, which is this idea of functional silos and specialist silos. Silos are not anomalies in the business world. I mean, we kind of talk about them as if they're anomalies, but actually they're not. They are really the kind of the key design principle on which our businesses actually survive. And you can look at all of our companies as being silos and parts of silos and compilations of silos. And I think one of the important things that we need to do is, I don't advocate this idea of smashing silos, because if you smash silos, you just get spills. But what I do advocate is trying to make sure of finding ways to create kind of pipelines between silos. So you start to you start to reward flows of information across departments rather than the aggregation of information and other resources within those departments. And so I think, the relationship between departments is more important in my mind than the departments themselves. And so I think that's one direction we need to be looking at. So that is how to improve the flow of value within organizations, between departments, and so on and so forth. Secondly, then, I think, as I mentioned, we need to be looking at ecosystem relationships. At the moment, we have fairly linear supply chain kind of relationships and channel partner relationships in our ecosystem. We don't really have more deeply entwined relationships that will allow us to kind of all think together about our end goals, our end customers, and to imagine what the future could look like if we actually all work together rather than in a kind of a linear, serial, sequential function. And then thirdly, so that's the second thing. And then the third is really, really kind of focusing much more sensitively on our customers, creating a much more sensitive skin, if you like, to develop a really sensitive kind of organ, such that we are able to understand what's going on with our customers, not just when they're responding to us directly, but also when they're communicating kind of more broadly in their everyday life. We need to have a much better, not just a direct sense and respond, but we need to be able to understand it in a very kind of broad sense as well. I've been coming across several examples where organizations who have very good brands are simply kind of not aware of what their customers are talking about, not exactly behind their backs, but what they're talking about in the social streams. And I think that we need to be getting a lot better at that, such we're really understanding sentiment, we're really understanding attitudes, we're really understanding, for instance, the new kind of habits that are forming. I mean, we've already talked about this, with COVID. We're way, way longer than the 66 days that on average are required for new habits to form. We're forming new habits that we don't even know we're forming yet. And it's going to become clear over the next year or two as we start to realize that the new normal is really not the same as the old normal.
Hmm.
Yeah, Henry. This is great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well,
So
thank you both very much indeed.
I'm sure John and I will invite you back. Henry, I look forward to all of our collaborations that we're working on together. So thank you for the opportunity. And I'll speak to you, I think, tomorrow in our meeting. Excellent.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, John.
Thank you so much. I can't wait for this one. So our next guest and I have been friends for a really, really long time. And she is just a powerhouse. Karen Mangia, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much. It's wonderful to be here. I feel like we're on a trip together without leaving our home offices. It's amazing.
You might be the expert on this subject, so I'm going to do a formal introduction, and then we'll kick it in there. John, feel free to jump in as well. I have a bunch of notes, but this is probably one of the hottest topics. I know it's one of the hottest trending topics out there on probably every social network. So Karen Mangia is a friend. She's a colleague at Salesforce. She is the Vice President of Customer and Market Insights. I'm going to read a formal bio, Karen. She engages customers globally to discover new ways of creating success and growth together. From executive advisory boards to strategic consulting engagements, her insights are central to go-to-market strategy, product development, marketing, and branding. Karen's also the author of a brand new book, so brand new that Amazon hasn't even gotten mine to me yet, Working from Home. Karen, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here, and congratulations on the new show. It's fantastic.
Oh, well, I got to tell you that John and I have been planning this for quite some time, maybe going back to maybe March, if I'm not mistaken. So we finally got around to it, and this is our debut show, and you are guest number 3, Karen. So let's jump right in. I want to start with, well, first, an overview of the book would probably be helpful, but also I think the story behind the book is part of the excitement and the value of the book itself. So let me turn it over to you and share a bit about the book. And Greg, if you can maybe find a cover, let's throw that online at the same time.
Well, what I think about, and in fact, Henry was saying it also, waiting for normal as we remember it to come back doesn't put us in a mindset of moving forward. And really accepting where we are right now, I think starts with, start with what you have, start with where you are and work with what you have. And so as I was thinking about really using this time that we're not on airplanes and going into offices as a time of opportunity, I was on the way to my book that's on pre-sale now and shipping in October called Listen Up: How to Tune into Customers and Turn Down the Noise. And I submitted the manuscript May 1st. I felt great. You know how it is when you accomplish a big goal. And I was having a conversation with my publisher about a week and a half later. And we got to talking about the work I was doing on our work from home task force and some blogging that I was doing with one of our fantastic colleagues, Vala Afshar. And if you don't follow him on Twitter, great guy to check out. And she said, I'll never forget this. She said, working from home, how would you like to write a book about that? Do you think you could do it? And off the cuff, I said, oh, well, in my sleep. Then it got real. She said, do you think you could do it in 2 weeks? I was like, no, I could not. And she said, do you think you could do it in 30 days? And the answer, what I shared back with her, I've sort of now discovered as really the 2 words I found that can help you do the impossible, or at least maybe get out of the way of your own thinking from time to time. And it was, why not? So what was interesting about why not was kind of seeing beyond any potential limitations. And from the time I signed that contract until I held this in my hand, it was less than 90 days.
Wow.
So very innovative for the publishing industry, and huge congratulations to the Wiley team as well. But what we really saw is people are in a place where they're looking for new ideas and new energy as we're kind of hitting this next stage.
Wow. John, why don't you go?
Well, we've both been through the process of writing multiple books. So hats off to you for figuring out an accelerated way of doing it. I'm curious to know, to the extent to which your book focuses on what we talked about earlier, which is this new disaggregation and maybe the rise of more entrepreneurs who have to find their own way out of necessity, and whether the working from home meme is relevant to the self-directed person in professional or business life, and how much of it relates to being a part of, a Fortune 1000 company, but in a more kind of distanced way, because there are probably a lot of different shades of working from home, and I'm curious to know how what kind of taxonomy you've created in the book.
I thought about it in terms of how to be relevant as the future of work is flexible. For some people, you are going into an office, For some people, you're there a little bit of the time and working from home. For some folks, it's work from home full time. What I'm discovering is sort of universally true at this point is people are looking for new ways to make their meetings interactive and engaging, so that experience of being on video calls all day is not fatiguing. Now, for some people, that takes the form of, I'm an entrepreneur and I'm doing a pitch to get funding or investment money. For some, that might be a sales call or co-creating content with someone else. Or maybe it's, just giving a presentation to your boss or someone you need to say next. But, how do you show up in a way that's engaging and energizing as opposed to exhausting? So, kind of looking in that direction. And it's also, thinking about what kind of mindset we need to be in at this point. And then the other piece I would say is whether you're an entrepreneur or working for a big company, it's also about burnout. We kind of hit this stage, and I talk about this in the book. I think we started with adrenaline, like whatever it takes to take care of our customers, whatever it takes to keep our family safe or stay healthy. Well, adrenaline wears off. And after that, it became the honeymoon is over. I mean, at first wearing your sweatpants and working from your bed seemed cool. After a while, it's like, is this really helping me be at my best? Your dog keeps barking, your boss keeps barking, your kids are in detention until 2023. It's like, okay, that gave way to the phase I think we're in now, which is how long is this going to last? And so what I talk about is, whether you're going to be in an office or you're a senior leader trying to think about how do you really create, a future of work, a flexible work, adaptable work kind of culture. What do you need to think through? What do you need to consider?
Yeah, one of those things that I think we could all appreciate this because we're all sort of working from home. I can tell you that before COVID-19, I had none of this stuff and trying to figure it all out in real time. A point that I'd like to bring up is one that I've been studying over the last couple of years, which has been sort of a new path for me, which was studying the relationship between being human and then also always on. And I think what we all saw was an immediate shift from work-life balance to almost like this work-life blending. Where's the on switch? Where's the off switch? And it's pretty easy to sort of blur those lines, but also blur realities of who you are in those lives. And one of the things that I saw in the book was this need to establish rituals, routines, and boundaries. And I'd love to hear more about that because I'm pretty sure I could learn from it and a lot of others could as well.
Well, when I think about that dynamic of, work always being on and your life always being on, it's how do we take ownership of the fact that that's all happening in the same space? And Henry was talking about this a moment ago. Some aspects of what happened with our habits kind of filled themselves in automatically. And we weren't consciously thinking in that adrenaline phase, what do I need so that I don't work all the time? Or how do I show up at my best? I mean, we were surviving. We were universally adjusting and adapting. And what happens now that Bloomberg did a great study where employees around the world are reporting an average of 2 to 3 hours more work each day.
Wow.
And the reality is work is a guest and it will only show up where you invite it. And so just like, going to your pantry all day long and having chips and the cookies someone in your house baked and answering the call of the leftovers in your refrigerator isn't really a healthy habit, grazing on work is the same way. I mean, periods of maximum performance require periods of maximum rest. And so what I've discovered is those routines, rituals, and boundaries help delineate and get you ready for, I'm going into the mindset of doing work. And then I have a catalyst, something in place that compels me to leave it behind and change gears. So I found those, go ahead.
Well, I love what you're saying. It's like, how do you establish rhythm in a completely white space situation where you can choose to do whatever you want at any given moment? I think, we're in violent agreement. I just wrote a piece for my column in Forbes.com where I interviewed a very eminent young jazz pianist named Dan Tepfer, who has an extraordinary approach to mindfulness in terms of shaping his practice. He takes notes, he has certain kind of mental practices, and he's constantly aware of progression. So he's created rhythm in an environment that's essentially arrhythmic to start out with, right? So I think the quality of mindfulness that you bring to your work and seeing it as a practice is very important. So I love what you're saying.
It's, it's how to be purposeful, right? I mean, you think about that mindless eating, and, you even think about your commute that you might have done in the past to and from the office, or if you were someone who flew, maybe that was your version of a commute. The reality is that physical activity of moving from one place to the next let you know that you were going to change into a different mode where something different was required. And, at the end of the day, if that was picking your children up from daycare or doing a happy hour, I mean, there was a catalyst that said, now shifting to a different gear and to a different mindset. And what's been amazing is having this conversation with people at all different organizations. I was with the Certified Financial Analyst Society yesterday, and then, visited with people at a variety of different companies. And so I asked them, what did you discover wasn't working and what are you putting in place? And I've been amazed. I mean, one woman shared that she was in sales. She's an extrovert. She lives by herself. And she realized that rolling out of bed in the morning and starting right into email made her feel more isolated. And so she changed her morning routine to do a little group text with friends and family where she would just send something funny or something inspiring or, a photo of a favorite moment they had shared. And what she discovered by starting her day with connection instead of chaos transformed her entire mindset for the day. And she started to look forward to it. So did the people on the receiving end. There was another gentleman who shared that he started with 5 minutes per day of meditation in the morning and 5 minutes at the end of the day focused on gratitude. He lost 70 pounds because he got more mindful, to your point, about putting structure and routine in one part of his life, and it carried over into others. He would step back and think, is that really what I want or need right now? Does that serve me? So I think it's about being mindful of the structure you're putting in place.
There's an interesting comment here from Alan Bergson. And what are you seeing in terms of generations? Are there differences that you're seeing across generations in terms of working from home and setting up those boundaries?
Well, a couple of factors seem to span all age categories and geographies, which are what people are reporting as kind of their top two feelings at the moment, which are feeling isolated and invisible. And even with all of the access to digital devices and experiences and ways to connect, people are still saying in a lot of ways, I don't feel connected, I don't feel seen, and I don't feel heard. And that's transcending age groups and countries and, company sizes and working styles.
Yeah. One thing that I come back to, and this is, we've talked about mindfulness, and we've talked about balance, is wellness, and how we can be sort of stewards of not only our own self-love, but also our own self-care, while also, understanding and appreciating that, we're in real time unlearning some of our skills and learning new skills, and taking sort of pride and happiness along the way to sort of celebrate this growth that we might not even realize we're going through.
Yeah. It's an invitation to authenticity, if we choose to see it that way, because now we're all showing up as very human. When your child wanders into the screen or someone rings your doorbell in the middle of the high stakes meeting or, whatever might be happening, everyone's experiencing it with you. And I think, the great line there is, are you willing to be authentic and vulnerable and say, hey, you know what? I'm in the same situation as you. And, I've got the same set of things to juggle. It's, letting ourselves have permission to show up imperfectly. When you go to an office or you stand on a keynote stage, you get to show up as a more polished version of yourself, right? Those other aspects of your life and humanity are out in the perimeter. And now we're contending with those all the time. And some of the people I'm seeing who are really thriving are inviting that in. The cat walks in front of the camera while you're giving the high stakes presentation, acknowledge the cat instead of pretending like it's not there. maybe say something funny if that's your style, and move on, as opposed to making that a source of stress or anxiety that something doesn't look or appear perfect.
It's a time of distributed self-care in a way. I mean, I love this thread that we've just exposed of wellness. And I just joined the advisory board of the Global Wellness Institute, which is a research center that's actually very actively trying to reimagine what wellness is, like school safety versus feeling safe, workplace safety versus feeling good about being at work. All of these things are kind of wellness issues. And, you describe this vulnerability to burnout and these toxic feelings. And, there's a lot of social problems that are at a higher level now than they were pre-pandemic. And so how we empower everyone to have self-care, to have the ability to deal with burnout, to practice positive self-regard, et cetera, is part and parcel, I think, from this whole working from home distributed topic that we were just talking about a moment ago as well.
Well, yes. And, I think the path forward on that, both the isolated and invisible and these wellness practices, stems around how to create and foster a sense of community.
Mm-hmm.
We all want to feel like we have places that we go where we belong and that we can show up as our full selves. And in the context of companies, I see some organizations doing really great work to bring people together, perhaps who are all mid-level managers, so that they can train each other and build a community of people for support. Mm-hmm. I know I've been amazed to watch a number of colleagues step up and share skills I didn't know they had, like leading meditation for a group or leading a breathwork class or coming up with these really innovative volunteer activities where you can be writing letters to veterans or on behalf of social justice. But the point is finding that higher sense of purpose or that area of shared need and being able to connect with other people on that level helps build that opportunity for belonging and connection and being visible and making an impact that we've been talking about.
That's so well said. I'm glad that we're recording this because that's something worth going back and listening to again, what you just said.
Yeah. I got to tell you, one of the things that's been a theme throughout this episode, and I got to imagine through future episodes as well, is the idea of just being human and allowing us to be human, or allowing ourselves to be human. And I love that invitation to authenticity. Karen, thank you so much for being on the show. I mean, that's just a remarkable story to have turned a book so quickly. I could never do that.
Yeah, me neither.
Probably take me that long just to do a blog post. And I'm excited to invite you back when your next book is on as well. Also, for those who don't know, Karen also has this all-inclusive resort that she's been highlighting during Shelter in Place. And it is just an incredible series of different themes of escapism that I can't even believe. She probably has more props and sets than any movie studio out there. So Karen, thank you so much.
My pleasure. It's great to be here. And thanks so much for giving people a space to have these conversations. And I think the solution, the path forward is we've got to figure it out together. And it's a time to invent and have great conversations like these.
Intersections.
Yeah. John, that's a great idea for a show. We should think about that. I love it. Thank you. Well, everybody, this brings us to the end of our show. But before we say goodbye for this week, just a couple of things. One is we're live every Thursday at 10:30 a.m. Pacific. These are recorded on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, on both John and my profiles. I also want to highlight a couple of real special people who make this show different and fresh and also exciting for me to even just be part of it. So first, I'd like to introduce Leslie Evers. She is the graphic recording artist who is bringing all of these conversations to life. John, I want to share a little bit about your relationship with Leslie.
Sure. I've been working with Leslie off and on for over 20 years, and she has this extraordinary gift of being able to integrate a discussion about virtually any topic at the requisite level of sophistication and represent it in visual form. It's almost like a visual flight recorder for the key points that come up. And she doesn't do this work very often, so I always feel like it's a dispensation when I get to work with her. She's got a fashion business, and she's a painter, and so she's got a lot of other stuff going on. And the intention here is that we're actually going to take the pages that you've seen and post them, most likely on Instagram and maybe elsewhere, and perhaps even figure out a way to make them available to our audience if you have an interest in having a hard copy.
Oh, yes, yes. And for those, they'll be up on flickr.com/Brian Solis. I'll put the URL here in the comments where you could see some of her work. I'll be featuring it. John will be featuring it in articles that we'll be writing in terms of summaries. So Leslie, thank you very much for being on with us. And we love working with you. So talented.
Thanks.
And she's wearing sunglasses because of computer glare, not because of the Holly Golightly imitation.
Although I keep singing her praise for it as well.
There you go.
Think it's cool. I'd also like to introduce our producer, Gregarious Narain. Greg is, I don't even know how many years we've known each other, and probably too many. And Greg is founder of Foundercraft, as well as a serial entrepreneur, most recently of Shoot. Greg, why don't you tell us about the startup that you're working on now, as well as some of your bodybuilding endeavors?
Hi. I am working on a new company. We haven't launched it yet. It's coming out very soon, but it is called Zealous and is a platform for creating private communities for your diehard fans. So we are hoping to launch one actually around intersections as well. It basically lets you deploy your own version of Instagram stories so you can share visually and communicate ideas with photos, videos, text, and whatever other way you might express yourself. Bodybuilding, I did a lot of innovation work for the last few years as well. So I wanted to help Brian and John because one, I was like, after I saw John's bio, I was like, wow, this guy is like amazing. And I already knew Brian was amazing. So I loved hearing the topics. It's really been great. And I like putting, the pieces together behind the scenes. So by all means, leave us comments on things we can improve. And we'd like to make this better as it goes along. And that is real life as it happens. Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, well, awesome. Oh, hey, Sullivan. Oh, how cute. How cute. All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We will see you next week. And if you have ideas for topics, if you have recommendations for guests, please reach out to us. In the meantime,
high five, Brian.
High five, John. Congratulations on the first show.